Hello, my name is Craig Harwood, and I'm co-author of a book, Quest for Flight. It's a biography of a man named John James Montgomery, who was a professor of science at Santa Clara College in the late 1800s. Montgomery was a man who worked in isolation in California to solve one of the most difficult technological challenges in modern times, flight. As of the late 1800s, the idea that man could fly in a heavier than aircraft was considered impossible. And many of the leading scientists in the world held this belief, and consequently, society in general looked askance of people who claimed they believed they could solve the problem of flight. Montgomery was a brilliant man, formerly educated in Jesuit institutions in the Bay Area, and did a lot of his most important work right here in Santa Clara County, San Jose, Santa Clara, in Santa Cruz County. His saga, the saga of his story, was to overcome this most difficult challenge through a scientific investigation of flight, observing birds, of applied engineering. He built a series of motorless craft in the late 1800s and flew them. And then finally, after the turn of the century, he was able to put all the pieces of the puzzle together and take gliders, basically gliders, lift them up thousands of feet above the earth in Santa Clara and San Jose, and his aeronaut would fly them around in full controlled flight. This was a time when the Wright brothers were still working in isolation in North Carolina and in Ohio, and they had not been able to have any kind of an impact or get recognition for their own success. Montgomery's demonstrations were large-scale public demonstrations. They were publicized all over the world. He published articles, gave many lectures, and shared his success with the public. So people here in the Santa Clara Valley at that time had the unique experience in the world of witnessing fully controlled flight for the first time in history. Not with motors, but these were gliders. If you explore his story and assemble it in chronological order, because of the people he interacted with, because of his talents, and because of the inspiration of his public exhibitions, he was able to impact society at large and inspire a whole generation of men and women to take to the skies. So his story really represents a unique Californian and Silicon Valley, pre-Silicon Valley contribution to this amazingly important technological advance in our history. So a lot of the research I did was both at Santa Clara University, their archives, and here at this branch library down in the basement in the microfiche section, looking at historical newspaper accounts. So I really appreciated this resource of the library, and I appreciate very much being invited here to participate in this event. For me, it comes kind of full circle to have done my research here and then to come back and share my book. Just as sort of a parting idea, I wanted to just point out that at 6 inches wide, it fits perfectly into a Christmas stocking. I've tried it myself. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I've been told I have 5 minutes, and it's really hard to present a book in 5 minutes, but I'll try my best. If I had to say just one thing about my book, Archie and Me, Memories of Love, I would read the first sentence of my prologue, which says, "I wrote this book because I believe that beautiful stories should be told, especially true stories." I started writing in the summer of 2006, right after my husband died. My son at the time was 2, and I figured he would have many questions growing up, and how would I address them 15, 20 years later? They say that emotion is what makes memories stay, and I definitely had a strong emotion, but there would be many little details that the passing of time would erase, and I didn't want that to happen. On the other hand, my husband was one of those amazing human beings who touched so many lives and inspired only love and admiration in those who met him, so I thought the book would be a great tribute to him as well. I started writing from the end because that was fresh in my mind. I wrote about the 3 weeks that he spent in the hospital, He had never been overnight in the hospital before, and he was supposed to be home in 4 or 5 days, but he never made it out. So after that, I told the real story. That was only 50 pages. After that, I thought, now there is the part that I really think it cannot go untold, the love story. So I chose 3 short fragments to read to you. The first one is my first impressions of Archie when I had just met the company where he worked. And I wrote, Archie's parents were both Chinese, but his maternal great-grandmother was Austrian, and his paternal great-great-grandmother was Dutch. Perhaps that was why he was tall, had big eyes, and his hair wasn't completely straight. I noticed his clothes, casual but stylish. But he wore something even more noticeable, a wonderful smile. The second one is from the day that we had to face the unthinkable. The doctor had the results from the biopsy, and he called us to meet him in his office. Archie and I left work immediately after. We walked to his car. He opened the passenger door for me and then went to the driver's side. We sat down and he turned on the engine. He stretched out his hand and I took it. There were no sufficient words to express our fears, so we chose silence as our companion. But something new, something unknown and greater than our fears emerged. We were together on this ride, and this was the one ride we would never get out of. If he had had any doubts before, now he could be sure that I loved him with all my heart, and I would be there for the long run, no matter what. The news was lung cancer, and I want to say that for his profile, non-smoker, and 33, the chances of getting it was 7 in a million. And also that lung cancer is one of the deadliest, only 2% make it past 5 years. And the last one is from years later, when my son was 14 months, I was honored to make the front page of the Mercury News on Valentine's Day. And in reflecting with the journalist who interviewed us about my choice to marry Archie, even after knowing or because of knowing his diagnosis, I write this. We told him how we met and fell in love and how that illness changed us, for good and bad. The bad is well known. Lung cancer is a death sentence that can only rarely be commuted. The good is what our love turned the bad into, the will to fight for life. But the best of it all is that the cancer did not only change our lives, but it also changed us. It made us appreciate every day together. We relished every moment and used every bit of happiness. Now, more than 3 years since diagnosis, we realized how much of that life and happiness we owed to the love we shared. Love made me trust my feeling that if I turned down its invitation, I would be turning my back to happiness. Who would knowingly do that? And I knew that I was face to face with happiness, and I chose to turn my back to cancer and death, and I never regretted it. Thank you. I hope that you have enjoyed some of my stories of love, and stop by if you want to get a copy.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Parthenia Hicks. I'm the Poet Laureate Emeritus of the town of Los Gatos, and I'm very happy to be here today and to be a part of this wonderful event and meet so many other local authors. Today I'm reading from Local Habitations. It is the book that Sally Ashton read from earlier, and it is the book that is comprised of the work of 5 local poets laureate. I also have work available today in an anthology, The Call, an anthology of women's writing. And in 2014, my book of poems, One Night She Swallowed the Moon, will be published by Dragonfly Press. I'm going to read 2 poems, and this first one is in response to a newspaper article a few years ago in the San Jose Mercury. And it was one of those brief, quick readings that I couldn't forget, and later a lot of personal outrage came up, and I felt compelled to write about it. Drag queen murders. Drag queen murders begin on April 26th, the death of Jose Alexis Barahona, alias Carla, a single shot, vascular eruption onto satin bodice, vena cava destroyed, all roads cut off. Alias Lucera, the latest victim, 23 years old, shot in the head, exploding tissue, dried oatmeal on cement. 7 dead homosexuals, 1 female prostitute found in or near San Salvador, Francisco, Diego, the cities of angels too. Sergeant Amoroso regrets the police cannot respond in a timely fashion. So much crime, so many budget cuts. These people are asking for it anyway, some 84 transvestite prostitutes working 11 areas all over the city. What's wrong with them anyway? That Punta boy found 21 miles away in San Luis Talpa. What was he doing there anyway? They're lucky their balls weren't cut off. Oh, but this is off the record. Don't quote me. And my second poem, an entirely different theme. If you have ever sat with a dying animal or creature, you know both the gift and the blessing of it. Salamander. The shredded sky pours flames of light on the obsessive road that crawls with steel and metal containers, the buzzing of bees buried in the honking crisscrossing of the dragon day. 14 hours, a lone salamander bears the fire of wheels crushing gravel, stays ruefully alive on the tufts of a kitchen towel in a cardboard shoebox. She lifts her head, opens her mouth in wide, silent scream, rest, then tries again, lost to the powers of regeneration, reduced to begging. Cicadas send their vibrating love song up against the dimming of the day. A carpenter bee lands on the porch. A small flame burns on the evening altar. Thank you so much.
I'm Richard Theodor Kusiolek. And first of all, I want to thank the library for doing what is really unique in Silicon Valley. It's really amazing, because I've looked at other libraries, and the work that was done to bring all of the authors together is really fabulous. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Just to give you an idea who I am, I'm a press correspondent for several international magazines, and also an adjunct business and technology professor. Angels in the Silicon is a very fast-paced literary investigative book. If you are new to Silicon Valley, or if you've been here for a while, Angels in the Silicon is a good read. Through the eyes of the entrepreneur protagonist, Thaddeus Sikorsky, the reader moves through 3 decades of economic and social upheavals that would affect the lives of his 2 children, metamorphically referred to as angels. It examines the forces that molded the American high-tech landscape in Silicon Valley, Many forces, such as the Vietnam War, the progressive movements in San Francisco, both peaceful, as I was involved in the early days with the feminist movement in San Francisco, and also the revolutionary elements such as the Black Panthers and also the Symbionese Liberation Army. The slow, painful breakup of the value fabrics of the American family, the lowering of state-sponsored standards, and the growth of the directed legalist court power upon contemporary society. It all started in Silicon Valley, which was an experimental crucible of progressivism and economic changes. According to Daniel Henninger, the essence of modern democratic progressivism is, quoting, "You will participate in what we have created for you and you will comply with the law's demand." At least Bill Clinton, who did not know of an assassination plot in Silicon Valley as revealed in this book, adhered to the old liberal view of coexistence with markets, property, and private enterprise. The book takes the reader on a journey into many of the true realities of living in Silicon Valley. I have lived in Silicon Valley for over 35 years, and I know how boom and bust venture capital models can divert careers to a cycle of economic and job instability, resulting in strains upon the family and, as a result, the children as well. The underlying premise of this novel is that this repackaged and glorified Silicon Valley version of instant riches in the embrace of progressivism by industry leaders really destroyed the true innovation cycle. Unique innovations such as the transistor and the PC made Silicon Valley an economic powerhouse without a social change agenda. California then became a mecca for hiring pools of gifted engineers and thinkers, and subsequently made the United States a global economic and military power. The new IT venture capital models of instant growth and then a spectacular decline might give a rush to the young and eager engineers and programmers, but in the end, the majority of startups fail. States take the place of their parents. The divorce rate in Silicon Valley, as you must know, is about 72%. Silicon Valley courts made judgments not on legal precedent, but based on social guidelines. And in closing, the nonfiction book, Angels into Silicon, has an underlining message, namely, that so much damage has been done to the future engine that drives technology innovation cycles, namely, the children of American families. Immediate reform is needed now, or children of technologists can never develop the mental capacity for math and science. It was not Silicon Valley high-tech jobs that were outsourced. Clearly, it was America that was outsourced. You can read Angels into Silicon and decide for yourself. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Most of us in this room are authors, and it's fantastic to be here, but I'm probably the only Catholic nun in the room. Am I right? My name is Sister Marilyn Lacey, and I'm the author of This Flowing Toward Me, which is basically the story of my conversion over a period of a quarter century of working with displaced persons, migrants, and refugees all around the world. The introduction or foreword was done by Helen Prejean, whose name you might recognize as the sister about whom the movie Dead Man Walking was made. So this book, the title is a bit strange. This flowing toward me is actually a phrase from the Islamic Sufi poem by Rumi about how blessings are always flowing toward us, but we're kind of sleepwalking through life and we don't see it, we don't recognize it, we don't stop and say thank you. So the subtitle of the book is a story of God arriving in strangers. I think it's a good read. It's an easy read. It's stories, and we all like stories. But I think it's a good and timely read because San Jose is one of the most diverse cities in the world. It's a richness that we can cherish and be grateful for, but it's also a threat to a lot of people. That change in demographics has happened very swiftly over the past 30 or 40 years, and not everybody's comfortable with it. The debate in our country about immigration is always rather volatile. So this book is really the story of my life because I'm convinced that strangers bring us more blessings than threats. And I believe that's a story that needs to be told nowadays. So that's why I did it. I didn't do it for fame or fortune, and I'm sure the rest of you didn't either. But I did it to tell my life experience and how I believe in the God who comes to us through crossing borders, through stretching ourselves a little bit beyond our comfort zone and being open to what is strange. God promised that's where God was going to hang out, on the margins, with the poor, with the forgotten, the people who don't count very much. I have been tremendously blessed to spend the last 33 years of my life working with refugees. I currently work in South Sudan and in Haiti. I have a nonprofit working with displaced women and girls. The stories in this book, I can promise you, will both make you laugh and make you weep. And I hope will contribute to the ongoing conversation that our population here in Santa Clara County needs to have, and our nation and our world, about whether diversity is a blessing or a threat, and what we're going to do individually about our global connectedness or our global fracturing. So again, it's $15. You can find it on Amazon under my name, Lacey. That's like Cagney and Lacey. Thank you for your attention.
I'm Jana McBurney-Lin, and it's a special pleasure to be here because I love libraries, and this is such a beautiful one. I can sit on the floor between the shelves for hours, immersed in the worlds that are offered. For me, the library has always been a place of dreams, and I want to tell you this afternoon about two dreams. The first one began on an innocent family vacation, or family visit rather, to China, and culminated when Komenar Publishing offered to take a chance on a first-time author like me. The second happened at a book signing, when Korean engineer who spoke earlier, Hee-dong Chai, approached me and asked if I'd be interested in helping him tell his story, Blossoms and Bayonets. The first story, My Half of the Sky, is about a contemporary young woman, Chinese woman, who's trying to hold up her half of the sky. She's trying to be modern, but the traditions of her village in Fujian, China, keep pulling her back. And while the narrative takes place in China and Singapore, Li Wei could just as easily be a Maya or an Ingrid or a Lisa or a Michal, because the question of where one reconciles the past traditions, with the modern momentum of our world is a challenge that we all face every day. But China and Singapore were natural location choices for me, and not just because China has some of the oldest traditions and the most wonderful stories in the world, and not just because 48-year-old Singapore is one of the youngest Asian countries, and that works so well with the juxtaposition of my theme, but because my husband is from southern China, and we lived quite a while, 8 years, in Singapore. And over the years, he not only told me many stories about his village in China, his parents, who lived with us in Singapore, also told me stories about the village. But we went back to China, we went back to the village, and we continue to go back quite often. And one year when we were back visiting, my husband and I were walking down the road, and I spotted this big, huge advertisement on the side of somebody's house. And it was a picture of a couple holding a newborn baby. And underneath were the characters, "A girl baby is just as important as a boy baby." And I turned to my husband, I said, "That is so cool. Obviously, the government is behind the valuing of little girls." He just shrugged his shoulders and said, "Well, the government can say what they want, but the fact of the matter is, a house with no mail is a real problem." And that's when I thought, okay, here's a story. What if a little girl is born into a house and manages to survive? How will she continue to thrive? How will she succeed when the traditions are against her? And that's how I got started on My Half of the Sky. What kept me going was the fun I had inserting a hearty romance, cultural misunderstandings, and fascinating tales from China that are not often heard in the West. My Half of the Sky has received lots of recognition. It was a BookSense Pick of the Month, received a 5-star Midwest Book Review, was a Forbes Book Club pick, and a Singapore Museum must-read, to name a few. And after writing this story, which took longer than I care to admit, I fell in love with the characters, and I was working on a sequel when I happened to be at a book signing, and dear Uncle Chai approached me and said, "Your novel reminds me of old Korea. Will you help me tell my story?" And he grew up, as he mentioned earlier, in World War II as the son of one of the first Christian ministers in the city. This turned out to be a double-edged sword. The family was constantly persecuted for their faith, but at the same time, that faith gave them strength. I was immediately captivated. Redwood Publishing released the resulting story, The Resulting Dream, Blossoms and Bayonets, in paperback this summer. The story takes place in 1942 in Japanese-occupied Seoul. I'm beeping. They're beeping. Anyway, it's based on the true story, and as it's right now pending review from the Historical Novel Society, and said former resident of Korea and author Cliff Garstang, it's a harrowing tale and one definitely worth reading. Thank you.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and I would like to reiterate my thanks to the library for bringing together readers and writers of the South Bay. It's a wonderful occasion. My name is Cathleen Miller, and I'm happy to be here. I was questioning, how did that happen? How did I come to be here today? And a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking in San Francisco at a conference called Writing for Change. And my theme was, how do we use writing, how do we use literature to change the world, which is a kind of heady concept. And I talked there about how we use rhetoric and storytelling to persuade an audience. This is something that I've done in my past 2 books. I wrote a book called Desert Flower, which was the life story of a woman from Somalia. She was circumcised as a little girl, and then she walked across the desert to escape an arranged marriage, and she, through a series of wild events that made a true Cinderella story, she wound up as a maid in London and was discovered and became a supermodel. She came to me when she decided that she wanted to tell her life story in hopes that she could put an end to this practice of female genital mutilation. And this book has had an amazing impact. It's had a life of its own. It's sold 11 million copies and was also made into a feature film. All of the money from that goes to a foundation to stop female genital mutilation. So in the process of working with Warris, I met people from the United Nations who had also begun to work on this issue. And And they decided that the story had to come from the women in Africa themselves. And I met an amazing woman there who was at the time head of the UN Population Fund. Here she is. This is Nafis Sadek, Dr. Nafis Sadek. She was trained as an obstetrician back in Pakistan, where she came from. And she went on after practicing medicine for many years and pursued a career as a diplomat because she decided she could make a larger impact at the United Nations than she could treating women one by one. And she was absolutely right in that philosophy, because when she came to the UN, the average birth rate in the world was 6 children per mother. And for the next 30 years, she pursued a strategy which at the time was revolutionary, that if you gave a girl access to education and you gave her access to contraception, the global birth rate would drop dramatically. This was an untested theory. After 30 years, the global birth rate had dropped to 3 children per mother. So whether you know it or not, this woman has had an impact on the life of every person in this room. The UN asked me if I would be interested in writing her life story when she retired, and I was quite honored, and so I took on this assignment, not dreaming what I was getting myself into. I realized it was a bit like handcuffing myself to the bumper of a racing fire engine. I traveled around the world. I met incredible people. I interviewed people from victims of human trafficking to the President of Ireland. And they all had a piece to tell me about Nafis Sadek's story. And along this road, I decided that one of the problems with talking about these issues is that in this country, thank God, we don't have a big experience with issues like female genital mutilation or obstetric fistula. So I set out to find women and girls who personified these issues and included in their stories are included in here, in between the chapters of Nafis Sadek's life. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julie K. Rose, and I'm from here in San Jose. In fact, a couple blocks from the Rose Garden branch, which is my favorite branch, yay. I'm also the co-chair of the Northern California chapter of the Historical Novel Society. So if you're interested in historical fiction, please come by and see me, and I'd love to tell you all about us. So I write historical fiction, and it's often stories set slightly off the beaten track. So Burgundy in the 12th century, Scandinavia at the turn of the century, interwar North Africa. My current novel is called Oleana, and it is set in Norway in 1905. It's the year that the country finally won its independence from its neighbors after hundreds of years. The book was inspired by the life of my great-grandfather, who left Norway at the turn of the century to homestead in North Dakota, but it's also really the story of the 2 sisters that he left behind. I'd never really considered writing a book inspired by my family because, it's just my family. We all have these stories. Like my great-great-uncle Ole, who moved from Suldal, Norway to Suldal, Wisconsin. Or my great-grandfather who moved from Norway to the improbably named town of Starkweather, North Dakota. So, we all have our own personal stories of immigration, and we have so many wonderful stories in the canon in the United States about immigration, and the trials and tears involved in making a new life. But I always wondered what it was like for the people who were left behind. I couldn't stop thinking about these women, these 2 sisters who were left behind by themselves on the farm. How did they make a life together? How did they live so isolated and trying to make a life, just the 2 of them by themselves? Just want to give you the quick blurb about the book. Oleana and her sister Elizabeth are the last of their family working their farm deep in the western Fjordland. A new century has begun, and the world outside is changing. But in the Sunnfjord, their world is as small and secluded as the verdant banks of a high mountain lake. The arrival of Anders, a cotter living just across the farm's border, unsettles Oleana's peaceful but isolated existence. Sharing a common bond of loneliness and grief, Anders stirs within her the wildness and wanderlust she's worked so hard to tame. When she's confronted with another crippling loss, Oleana must decide once and for all how to face her past, claim her future, and find her place in a wide new world. So plenty of people know about Scandinavian crime fiction. They know about the miniseries The Vikings. They know about maybe the Christian Lavransdatter trilogy set in medieval Norway. And there's some really cool and important books set in Norway during World War II that are coming out. But there's very little literature in English about Norway at the turn of the century. And I'm really excited to be able to introduce people to this time and place. I was lucky enough to visit Norway in 2004, and it really ended up being a character all of its own in the book. And in fact, so many readers have come up to me afterward and said, I got to go to Norway. I've read your book. I got to go to Norway. I think I really kind of need a little kickback from the old Visit Norway folks because of that. Again, just a quick plug about the Historical Novel Society. If you're interested in historical fiction as a reader or a writer, please come see me. I'd love to tell you all about our group. And we've got some great folks, some great activities, and we'd love to see you. So thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Alan Soldofsky. I'm a professor in the Department of English here at San Jose State, head of the creative writing program here, and a longtime resident of Negley Park and a fan of this library, so it's great to be here. My book is called In the Buddha Factory, published by Truman State University Press. Truman State is located near St. Louis, Missouri, which ironically is the place my family comes from. I'll read two poems from the book. The first is a kind of introduction. The poems in the book concern a number of things, and there are a number of voices. There are a number of love poems in the book, and I'll read one that is a kind of love poem. And then there are a lot of travel poems in the book. The title poem, which I'll read, In the Buddha Factory, I had a chance to write after spending almost 4 weeks in Zhejiang province in central China on the coast, where I was attending the Zhejiang Writers Festival and where I was lecturing at Hangzhou University. This one's called Present. Here in the blue sheen of the present, vanishing even as it arrives, I want to give you something, a present, although it is worth less than the string of pearls I can't afford to buy. It is only this arrangement of words with which I hope you will adorn yourself. My description of you, beauty so practiced, a rendition of Helen's colors chosen to allure. The first time I saw you, I couldn't help but keep the contours of your countenance in my mind, the way a live oak keeps its leaves. It cannot exist without its canopy. You prefer the sleek hardware of a tropical breeze that makes each part of you tremble. Let my gift be that well designed, to be indispensable as the sky. Something you would keep that may not seem important, but that will, in the rondure of the night while you sleep, remind you that love is here, even if it needs from time to time to be repaired. that it's ubiquitous as water, spraying from the nozzle when you shower, that continually runs down the drain, only to be replenished. And this is the title poem. And thank you very much for the opportunity to read. In the Buddha Factory. Form without a body, body without form, where we start and where we end. You remember ascending the hillside through the green expanse of afternoon mist dripping off the ganglia of mulberry. A few pink blossoms already exploding, quavering in the low wind. In the temple, the abbot fished in his robes for his cell phone, surprised at such ringing in the world. In a cloud, at the top of the mountain, you found a staircase leading down to a fat statue leafed with golden moss, mouth open, laughing. So difficult to tell what is genuine. You saw hundreds like that one arranged for display in the showroom, rows of them in various postures, washed in the commodious tinctures of commerce. Bodhisattvas, male and female, some with red fingernails waiting to be sold to resorts in Las Vegas. Nearby, the world's largest Buddha is being assembled in a shed like an airplane hangar, its nose about the size of a Learjet. You can't help and bow and mutter prayers. It's good business, the manufacturer says, his own father a believer. You couldn't know you were here to prepare for the hard silence ahead when someone close to you labors for breath, flesh dimmed, and insolvent spirit, the nurse feeding him morphine an ampule an hour, one eye lolling open as if to see beyond the light. Then there's you, rubbing a spot on the top of your head, looking away at a normal face on TV to distract yourself from death's disheveled taxonomy. Outside in the jaggy water of the marina, boats lull at anchor, repeating the sea's endless detachment from the weight of its occupants. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tim Stanley. I have 3 books that are published. I'm mostly known for a recent local history called The Last of the Prune Pickers, a pre-Silicon Valley story. Not long before the Santa Clara County was known for silicon, this place was largely orchards. Most of the orchards were parts of small family farms, and there were thousands of them. This is the story of what preceded those farms, how they came into being, and how they thrived. It's also the story of one of the last of those fruit farms, and of the farmer, and of some of the young boys and girls who had the privilege of working for him. We were among the last of the prune pickers. So the book is in 2 parts. The first part is a general agricultural history of the valley. The second part is the story of one fruit farm. It was typical of more than 7,000 that were here at one time. The second book I'll tell you about just came out last month, very different subject matter. It's called Mercury Poisoning and Healthcare, Lessons Learned from a 30-Year Battle for Health. This is my wife's story. She, like a large and growing number of people, had physical ailments that did not match the medical textbooks. Because of that, I was eventually taken aside, and even though she had horrible physical problems, I was told that her problems were mental by one of her doctors. This is her story. It turns out that the mental problem was not hers. The book was written for the countless thousands of people who have ailments that do not fit the mold of modern medicine. This book is not merely about mercury poisoning, although it covers that subject very well. It's even more about the absolutely different way that we had to take to get to the bottom of a very serious health issue. If you have multiple allergies or an autoimmune condition, blood sugar condition, or adrenal problems, this book will help you. If you have all of those, please don't leave before you get a book. Or if you just want to live in a healthier way, come see me right there. Last book I'll tell you about was actually my first, very different subject again. It's called Letters to My Feathered Friends, Observations, Meditations, and Thanksgivings. It's a collection of 76 bird poems and stories with complementing colored photographs, very beautiful photographs by some top photographers in the book. It is wholesome, educational, and very thoughtful. If you would like one of the books, come right here, or just look me up on the web, the number 2, Timothy Publishing, or you could just look up the titles, The Last of the Prune Pickers, Mercury Poisoning and Healthcare, or Letters to My Feathered Friends, and Google will take you right to them. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michal Strutin. I'm the author of 8 books and one on the way. Mostly they're about nature and travel. I'm also an editor, and I've worked as an editor at Outside Magazine, National Parks, at newspapers around the Bay Area. And I am also, right now, the science librarian at Santa Clara University, so I well know about Spine of the Continent, because I bought it for the university. Discovering Natural Israel is, I think, the only book on all of natural Israel, from north to south, east to west. And most people, when they think of Israel, they think of not such nice things, but if you go in the spring, it's really a festival of wildflowers. It's the place where 3 continents come together, so you're just not going to find a place with a more diverse and dense amount of flora and fauna. And so, I also talk, I tell all the stories about the people I met on the trails, and things like, when's the best time to ride a camel backwards? There is such a time. And I was so struck, it also includes human history, and I was so struck by the potency of that now I have historical fiction coming out, Promised Land, a biblical novel, and basically human history has not changed. Human condition has not changed that much since then, so it's really stories kind of ripped from the headlines, tensions between a free generation and their slave-born parents, scheming political operatives, fanatical, religious extremists, and when Israelites and Midianites clash, thorny questions like, whose land is it? So look for that, please. And one other thing I'd like to say is, I believe everyone should write. It's a wonderful thing to do. And if you do, go to Google Elmore Leonard's 10 Rules of Writing. It's a truly fantastic list, and here is one of them. Avoid detailed descriptions of characters. That sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? But the deal that you should make with a reader as a writer is that you are a collaborator. So you have to give readers enough space to fill in the book, your book, with their own imagination. It makes their experience richer and more personal. And having been an editor and a writer, I know that writing is truly a collaboration between writer and editor. But in a truly deep sense, it's also a collaboration between writer and reader. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here with so many writers and audiences. I wish there were more, but that's what it is. My experience of coming to San Jose was mostly going to the library school. It was very fraught with overspeeding, getting stopped by cops, trying to get to the class on time. So this is a little different. This is very different kind of feeling to come here to talk about your work, creative work. I write fiction mostly, and I translate across English, Urdu, Punjabi, and Hindi. One of the writers I translated from Urdu was recently nominated for Man International Booker Prize. Anyway, my first collection of short stories came out in 2008, Idol Lover and Other Stories. The expression Idol Lover comes from an Urdu couplet, and it's a story about a person who has lost family members to the madness of partition and has moved to India, yet he's very drawn to Muslim women. Make whatever you will of it. My second collection is out any day, and I was hoping I would be able to bring some copies, but that wasn't to be. And it's called Cafe Lahore, and Other Stories, and it's a play on the city I come from, Lahore. When I was new in this country, friends and colleagues would laugh whenever I said I was born in Lahore, and it took me a while to realize what was going on. And once that sank in, I thought it was pretty funny. But when I titled the story Lahore with L-E, which is a male article, and whore in the Western imagination is a female pronoun, they pointed out the error. I said, well, it's on purpose. And what the purpose is, you'll find out when you read the story. And I also realized that the word whore is not French. It comes from the Arabic word huri. Having said a little bit about my writing, I think it's only fair that I give you a little slice of, a little flavor of my titled short story from the first book. As I said, it's called The Idol Lover. In a recurrent dream, appearing sporadically and nearly unchanged, he would recognize himself, more from the intimacy of the dream than from his own face, in the midst of a prolonged abysmal fall. Before he could die, he would wake up with a shriek, sit up in bed, and panting, soaked in perspiration, wonder why none of the other soldiers in his barracks had woken to his scream. Just then, or nearly, two dark eyes of a woman would appear and stare at him in the darkness. And as if taking a cue from those eyes, he would then turn on his side, afraid, still half asleep, learning once again that he just dreamed a dream within a dream. A scorpion of fear would flex his tail in his heart, forcing him to keep his eyes closed. Naib Subedar Premlal Singh was of a proud and proven Rajput stock. His forefathers were among the Hindu warriors who, under the tutelage of Raja Ranjit Singh Khana, had held off the British from entering the Five Rivers. According to family legend, while defending the Punjab, 2 or 3 of his forefathers had achieved martyrdom. And the knowledge of this profound sacrifice obliged Premlal to keep his head high with pride. A century later, His ancestors had once again proved their mettle fighting for the British, not just in India, but also in the Middle East and Africa. A list of martyrs was longer than the list of those who returned with missing limbs, like his uncle, Makhan Singh Tunda. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Erin Thomas, and my book that I'm presenting today is called Coal in Our Veins, A Personal Journey. The inspiration for this book was my grandfather. He grew up in mining camps and then went on to become an educator. But as a young man, he spent time with his father working in the mines. In 2006, in January, I was walking through the Chicago airport, and there was a news flash of the Sago mining disaster in West Virginia. It was the first time that I realized that the stories that I'd grown up on as a child about the mining disasters that my great-grandfather escaped just barely, that these sort of things still happened, and that there were people living the way that my great-grandfather and grandfather lived today. And that's what began my journey, my personal journey into the history of coal mining. This book starts in Wells, where my ancestors mined, moves to Utah, where my grandfather mined, and then to West Virginia, the location of some of the worst mining practices of today. After, in my hometown then of Washington, D.C., I decided to talk to major players in the energy industry to find out where mining was going to go, where the history of our energy was going to go from there. So that's the scope of this book. What I wanted to read today is a selection from West Virginia. One of the people that I met in West Virginia, his name was Larry Gibson. Larry Gibson was 5'0". He had very little education, and he was standing his ground against some of the most powerful coal mining companies in West Virginia. Kafir Mountain is the only place in the nation that you can view mountaintop removal. And that's because Larry Gibson refused to sell the rest of his property to the coal mining companies. It was in 1990 that his family sold the rest of the land to the coal companies. They didn't know it because they were illiterate, and they signed a piece of paper without knowing what it said. It wasn't until 1995 that they found out that they no longer owned their land that they had farmed for generations. I'm going to read just a short selection of this. At the edge of Larry's property, the ground dropped off. The mountain ended, and a company sign nailed to a tree warned onlookers, private property. A last desperate attempt to prevent me from seeing. Having grown up in a desert, I am accustomed to emptiness and distance, but not such sudden emptiness. A gouge taken out of greenness. Directly below, a field of reclaimed land sprouted pale, scrubby grass, the only foliage likely to accumulate without trees to develop topsoil. Under the thin spread of dirt lay only bedrock. Massey had buried all the clear-cut forest capable of providing fodder beneath hundreds of feet of rock and debris. Beyond the field stretched a terraced wasteland of tawny-colored dirt with dark black stripes running through it. In such great emptiness, the mega machinery used to excavate this coal appeared like miniature toy trucks in a sandbox, adding a surreal aura to the reality of such irreversible destruction. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Janice T. I'm a poet. So I've written a book of poetry. It's called Echoes, Neo-Victorian Poetry, and it echoes back to earlier times. I've been writing since I was 11 years old, and my mentors were in books, and they wrote between 1250 and 1920. So they were the ones who taught me how to write. I have a box of poetry, and this is the very first out of the box. I'd like to read one piece to you. This is called Emery. Emery had a nose of stone, an outgrowth of his weighted mind. Of alabaster was it honed into a feature aquiline. Its heft was such that Emery would counterbalance with his jaw. By upward thrust of chin, thus he intended to reduce this flaw. But oh, his lips contorted, and his limited perception showed only a level skyward span and nothing below. Many men were victimized, and many things they valued too, because poor Emery was blind to that which was not in his view. The morning of one winter's day, he walked a promontory ridge. Poor Emery saw not the way, but fell. It was the last of him. I'd like to read one more piece to you. And this one's called Shantytown. The sun goes down on Shantytown and drags all light away, and not one moonbeam touches ground, though numerous are they. Not even do the eyes of owls pervade the ebon plight, where air is foul, where stray dogs howl, and babes cry through the night. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Emily Thompson, and I'm a self-published author. And this one is the first in a series of 12 that I'm doing. It's an adventure novel. I don't know if many of you have heard of steampunk, so I'll give you a quick idea what the genre's like. It's basically, it's fantasy set in 1870. So we have steam trains, and we have clockwork, and we have beautiful gowns and top hats and all that wonderful things. But then we also have, you know, vampires and werewolves and airships and pirates. So it's great fun. It's a really good genre. I love writing in it. So my book, Book 1, Waking, of the Clockwork Twist series, is about a clockmaker named Twist, who lives in London, minds his own business, you know, a little introvert. And then one day, of course, as you do, ends up getting swept off on a big grand adventure halfway around the world to try to repair the Clockwork Princess. And he's instantly surrounded by airship pirates. He falls in the Caspian Sea. It's a good time. So basically, it's just a fun sort of escapist sort of adventure. And you can actually read the first 3 chapters of my book on my website, clockworktwist.com. And I've also got Facebook and all that. So give it a look. You might enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Linda Ulleseit. I have 2 books here today. I'm a 5th generation Northern Californian, and most of those people were in and out of San Jose during that time, so I have lots of roots to the city. I have 2 books. This first one is called On a Wing and a Dare, and the second one is called In the Winds of Danger. These are fantasy novels set in medieval Wales. They're basically realistic fiction, except that there are flying horses in the town. They're young adult novels. I like to say young at heart adults, because I have adults that like them too. They are realistic fiction, as I said, coming of age stories. In the first one, the horses, the winged horses, start to die, and the adults are flabbergasted. They don't know what to do. And it's up to the children, the teenagers, to save the world. Kids love that kind of thing. In this one, a young girl is tapped to be the next barn leader, 17-year-old, and she's flattered, but she doesn't know why they picked her. And then she figures out that they want to control her. Well, she has other ideas. Once a year, they have the aerial games in this town, and it's like an Olympics in the air. So there's the competition aspect between the barns also. I've been writing since I was old enough to hold a pencil, and I've enjoyed it very much. I'm currently working on the 3rd one in the series, and I also have a historical fiction novel based in Northern California that will be coming out soon. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Woodworth, and my book, Ray and Amy, A True Story of World War II, is based on the experiences of my parents during the war. My parents met just a few months before Pearl Harbor, and after Pearl Harbor, my father enlisted in the Army Air Corps with the hope that it would make him a pilot. Unfortunately, for what his desires were, he was turned into a bombardier. He was assigned to the 305th Bomb Group, shipped out to England in late 1942 with the group, and 6 months later, on his 23rd mission, he was shot down over Kiel, Germany. He spent almost 2 years in a German prisoner of war camp, Stalag Luft III, famous for being the site of the Great Escape. And in 1945, he was liberated by Patton's Third Army and came home to my mother. My mother spent the war years waiting for my father to return, volunteering as a Red Cross Gray Lady and doing other things to help support the war effort and just basically keep the household going. It's, I believe, a wonderful story about two people who were part of what Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation. They themselves were not, they were ordinary human beings. They were not great heroes in the sense that, didn't save any great lives or anything like that, but they were just ordinary people who were part of that generation. Everybody was heroes. It was a very tremendous moment in history, trying to save the world from totalitarianism, and I think in general it's something memory that needs to be kept alive, and I was very proud to have been able to write this book about my parents' experiences as an example of the experiences of many Americans during that time. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kenneth Worthy, and I'm an environmental scholar, a research associate at UC Santa Cruz. I teach at UC Santa Cruz, at St. Mary's College of California, and at UC Berkeley. And I'm the author of this book, Invisible Nature, Healing the Destructive Divide Between People and the Environment, published by Prometheus Books. And Invisible Nature is not a modest book. It is tackling what is perhaps the most important question of our time, which is, why is it that environmental crisis seems to march on against our will and against our own desires? And the conclusion that I've come to in Invisible Nature is the fact that in our daily lives, nature seems to be invisible. We make decisions every day, all day long, that affect nature, that affect the systems, the ecological systems that we depend on for our well-being and for our health. And we are completely cut off from most of the consequences of those daily actions. Every day we turn on a light switch, and maybe it causes a coal-fired power plant to be turned on to power the electrical systems, and the coal-fired power plant exhausts coal and mercury and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, and those all have consequences, but we don't see those consequences. And this is a unique thing about modern life. Actually, throughout almost all of human history, throughout 99.9% of human history, people have actually witnessed the consequences of their everyday choices. Almost all of the consequences of their everyday choices have been present to them. And now we have a total phenomenological disengagement with the outcomes of our choices. And what's interesting about the modern period is not only that these actions are against our will, propagated against our will, but also that we are so disconnected from them, we can't really respond to them. So I look at the history of the ideas in the West that have underlined our disconnection from nature and underlined all sorts of different kinds of separations in the world. Separations from our daily processes that we depend on. We no longer make our own food. We're kind of divorced from that whole process. We no longer make the buildings we live in. we become kind of like objects in this economy. So the modern economy is very good at distributing consequences so that the benefits of our actions come to us. You buy a smartphone and you get all the benefits of that. Well, actually, smartphones and a lot of other electronics are very dirty technologies, not clean technologies. And part of that is that they're made up of so many toxic chemicals, actually. Much more pounds and pounds of toxic chemicals go into the production of a laptop, a computer, or a smartphone, and they go up into the atmosphere, they go into workers' bodies here in Silicon Valley and also in China and everywhere else that electronics are made, and they go into the earth. I have a question for you. Does anyone here know what is the most contaminated county in the country as far as Superfund sites goes? Santa Clara Valley, Santa Clara County, right here. 29 Superfund sites, and almost all of them are from high-tech electronics production. Most of the contamination came decades ago from IBM and other companies when they were doing their manufacturing. But in Invisible Nature, I present the way toward reconnecting with the outcomes of our choices, reconnecting with nature, and starting to observe and experience with our own senses what we're doing in the world, how we are changing the world. And that includes all sorts of things that are easy to implement, like more field trips for students to go to factories and farms to really witness how their own actions in the world propagate out into the world, but also more structural differences in the long term where we live in a society where we can take back the power, we can get more involved in the democratic processes of governance so that between us and our elected officials aren't layers of industry and corporations that are actually calling the shots. Anyway, my book is Invisible Nature, and I'm sitting right over there, and I'm happy to have anyone come over and talk to me about it and take a look. Thank you very much.